Imagine this, you are standing in prayer. The Imam is reciting beautifully, your concentration is finally perfect, and then suddenly you feel a little rumble. You pretend nothing happened. You think, maybe nobody noticed, but then the air has escaped. Now here's the problem. Your heart is telling you, brother, sister, we have a situation. But your ego whispers, just finish the prayer. People will look at you if you leave. My brothers and sisters, let's be honest, this happens to more people than you think. And today we're going to learn what to do immediately when it happens and why it's so important. Islam is a faith that beautifully balances the spiritual with the practical. It does not call its followers to worship in a way that ignores the realities of human life. Instead, it recognizes our needs, our physical conditions, and even the small everyday occurrences that may seem trivial to others but are important in the eyes of Allah. One of these is cleanliness and personal purity. In Islam, this is not just a matter of hygiene or social courtesy, it is a requirement for the validity of certain acts of worship, especially salah. The command to be in a state of purity before prayer is rooted in mercy and wisdom. When Allah tells us to approach Him with wudhu, it is not to burden us with extra steps, but to elevate the quality of our worship. Imagine standing before the King of all kings. You would want to be in your best state. Wudhu refreshes the body and clears the mind. It is a moment to pause, cleanse, and prepare the heart for a meeting with our Creator. This practicality extends even to matters that people might find awkward to discuss, such as passing wind. Islam does not pretend such things don't happen, rather it sets clear guidelines for what to do when they do happen. Passing wind nullifies wudhu, and therefore if it occurs during salah, the prayer is no longer valid. This is not about embarrassment or social perception, it is about maintaining the purity required for salah to be accepted. The ruling applies equally whether it happens in private or in a crowded masjid, because Allah's command does not change based on who is watching. Cleanliness in Islam is comprehensive. It covers the body, the clothes, and the place of worship. A believer is encouraged to keep nails trimmed, hair neat, mouth fresh, and garments clean. This is not simply to look good but to present oneself in a state that is pleasing to Allah. Even the removal of bad odors is considered part of good manners in the masjid, out of consideration for fellow worshippers and respect for the sanctity of the place. Through these teachings, Islam reminds us that physical cleanliness is deeply connected to spiritual purity. Our body is the vessel through which we worship, and keeping it pure honors both the act of worship and the one we worship. Wudhu or ablution is the key that unlocks the door to salah. Without it, the prayer cannot be accepted no matter how beautifully it is performed outwardly. The conditions that nullify wudhu are clearly defined in Islamic teachings, ensuring that a believer always approaches Allah in a state of purity. Understanding what breaks wudhu is not about technical rules for their own sake, it is about safeguarding the sanctity of our worship. One of the most well-known nullifiers is the passing of wind. No matter how minor it seems, this act breaks the state of wudhu because it releases impurity from the body. This includes both audible and silent occurrences. It is not dependent on smell or sound but on the fact that something has exited from the private parts. Similarly, any discharge from the front or back passage, whether urine, feces, or other substances, nullifies wudhu. Even a small amount is considered enough to require renewal of purification before prayer. Another matter that nullifies wudhu is the loss of consciousness. This can happen through deep sleep in a posture where one is not seated firmly, fainting, intoxication, or any other condition where awareness is lost. The reason is that in such states a person may have passed wind or lost control of bodily functions without realizing it. The principle in Islam is to ensure certainty of purity before standing in prayer. Touching the private parts directly with the hand without a barrier is also among the actions that break wudhu according to many scholars. This ruling is based on clear prophetic guidance highlighting the importance of avoiding doubt when it comes to purity. In addition, anything that causes impurity to flow from the body, such as bleeding from a wound in a significant amount according to some schools of thought, may require wudhu to be renewed. The beauty in these rulings is that they are not meant to make worship difficult, but to preserve its quality and acceptance. Allah does not burden us unnecessarily. Instead, He provides clear, simple steps to ensure we are always ready to meet Him in the best possible condition. By knowing what nullifies wudu, a believer can protect their prayer, avoid invalid acts of worship, and maintain the link between physical cleanliness and spiritual devotion. Honesty before Allah is one of the deepest forms of sincerity a believer can cultivate. It goes beyond speaking the truth with our tongues. It is about being truthful in our actions, intentions, and states of worship. While people around us may only see our outward behavior, Allah knows the reality within our hearts and the exact condition of our worship. This awareness should shape how we approach acts of devotion, including something as essential as salah. When a person's wudu is broken, whether by passing wind, using the toilet, or any other nullifier, they know within themselves that their state of purity has ended. Others might not notice, and there is often a temptation to carry on praying to avoid embarrassment or questions from those around. But here lies the true test of honesty. Do we continue for the sake of appearances, or do we stop and renew our purity for the sake of Allah? Honesty before Allah means acknowledging that the value of our prayer is not in how it looks to people, but in whether it meets the conditions He has set. If the prayer is invalid in His sight, then no matter how perfectly we perform it outwardly, it holds no weight on the Day of Judgment. The Prophet ﷺ reminded us that Allah accepts only that which is done sincerely for His sake and in accordance with His command. This means our first loyalty is to His rules, even if following them causes us a moment of discomfort in front of others. This kind of honesty requires courage. It means walking away from the prayer line when we know our wudu is broken, without worrying about whispers or assumptions. It means choosing the eternal reward over temporary pride. It also means admitting our human limitations, that we make mistakes, that our bodies function naturally, and that Allah in His wisdom has given us a way to correct our state before returning to worship. Ultimately, being honest before Allah is an act of humility. It is an acknowledgement that He sees us completely, in the mosque, at home, in public, and in private. It is trusting that His pleasure is worth far more than human approval, and that an honest, valid prayer is infinitely better than a beautiful false one. When a person's wudu is broken during prayer, the correct response is not to hesitate or hope it doesn't count, but to act immediately in accordance with Islamic guidance. The first step is to quietly leave the prayer, without drawing unnecessary attention to oneself. There is no need for public explanations or signs. The matter is between the individual and Allah. If one is in a congregational prayer, it is permissible to exit calmly and respectfully, without disturbing the concentration of others. Once outside the prayer area, the next step is to perform wudu again. This renewal of purity is a requirement, not an optional act, because the condition for salah is that the person must be in a state of ritual cleanliness from start to finish. Even if the loss of wudu happens just moments before the final salam, the prayer cannot be completed without restoring purity. In this case, the person will need to repeat the prayer after making wudu. If the incident occurs during a congregational prayer and the person returns quickly after performing wudu, they may rejoin if the prayer is still ongoing, starting from the point at which they join. The missed parts can then be completed after the imam finishes. However, if the prayer has already ended, it should be prayed in full individually. The key is not to delay unnecessarily. Purification should be performed promptly so the act of worship can be resumed or made up without procrastination. It is important to remember that Islamic teachings on this matter are rooted in mercy and discipline, not embarrassment or shame. The Prophet ﷺ taught his companions the rulings of purity clearly, without hesitation, because it is better to correct the state of worship than to pretend everything is fine. Those who act upon these rulings demonstrate their commitment to Allah's commands over their own pride. This practice also helps cultivate sincerity. By leaving to perform wudu, a person shows that their main concern is the acceptance of their prayer by Allah, not the opinions of those around them. The right action in such moments may feel awkward, but it protects the integrity of one's worship and ensures that the effort spent in prayer is not wasted. In the end, the quiet steps taken to maintain purity speak louder to Allah than any attempt to save face before people. Many believers find themselves in situations where their sense of shyness clashes with the clear commands of Allah. One of these moments is when a person's wudu breaks during prayer, especially in a congregational setting. The natural human reaction is to feel embarrassed at the thought of leaving the row, imagining what others might think or say. This is a normal feeling, but it becomes a test of priorities. Do we choose to obey Allah's ruling, or do we choose to preserve our image in the eyes of people? Shyness in Islam is a noble quality when it protects us from sin and leads us to good manners. However, when shyness prevents us from fulfilling an obligation or correcting a mistake, it becomes misplaced. True modesty is rooted in awareness of Allah, not in fear of human opinion. If a believer's wudu breaks, the right course is to leave the prayer, perform ablution again, and then return to complete the salah, even if it means others will notice. The challenge is that shyness often whispers excuses, just finish, it's almost over, or people will think badly of you, but these whispers place the approval of people above the command of the Creator. On the Day of Judgment, the people whose opinion we feared will not be able to help us. What will matter is whether our worship was accepted by Allah, and He has already told us the conditions for that acceptance. Obedience in such moments requires courage. It means training the heart to recognize that Allah's pleasure is more valuable than public perception. It means reminding oneself that any discomfort or awkwardness in front of people is temporary, while the reward for sincere obedience is eternal. It also means understanding that by acting correctly, we may inspire others to do the same in similar situations. The companions of the Prophet ﷺ were not shy to leave the prayer if their purity was broken, because they knew that obedience was the essence of sincerity. They valued Allah's command more than their own reputation. By following their example, a believer develops the habit of placing divine approval above all else. This is the kind of shyness that Islam praises, one that makes us concerned about how we appear before Allah, not just how we appear before people. Purity in Islam is not limited to physical cleanliness, it is deeply connected to the state of the heart and soul. When a believer takes care to maintain wudu and follow the rulings of purification, they are not merely preparing their body for prayer, they are preparing their inner self to stand before Allah. The outward act of washing with water reflects an inward intention to remove spiritual stains and distractions, creating a moment of readiness for true connection with the Creator. Salah is described as a meeting with Allah, and like any important meeting, preparation matters. Just as one would not appear before a dignitary in a careless state, the believer should not stand before the Lord of all worlds without fulfilling the conditions He has set. This includes ensuring that wudu is valid from the beginning of the prayer until the end. If purity is lost during the prayer itself loses its foundation, no matter how perfect it may seem outwardly. The Prophet ﷺ taught that Allah does not accept the prayer without purification. This shows that the physical state is not separate from the spiritual one. By following the rulings on purity, the believer demonstrates humility, acknowledging that worship must be done on Allah's terms, not our own. It is a reminder that even the smallest details of our worship are significant, because they show our willingness to obey fully. Passing wind or any other nullifier of wudu during prayer may seem like a small matter, but it is actually a moment of choice, a test of sincerity. Do we continue for the sake of appearance, or do we pause, renew our purity, and return to prayer for the sake of Allah's acceptance? This decision reflects the state of the heart far more than the act itself. Maintaining both physical and spiritual purity also brings a sense of lightness and clarity. Just as washing removes physical dirt, it symbolizes the washing away of heedlessness, pride, or negligence. Each time we perform wudu, we are reminded that our connection to Allah requires care, attention, and renewal. This is why the Prophet ﷺ encouraged staying in a state of wudu as much as possible. It keeps the believer ready to worship at any moment, and it keeps the soul in a state of readiness to meet its Lord. My beloved brothers and sisters, the matter may seem small, a moment in prayer when our wudu breaks, but in reality, it is a mirror that reflects the depth of our sincerity, the strength of our obedience, and the purity of our worship. Islam, in its wisdom, teaches us that both our body and heart must be clean when we stand before Allah. The rulings on what breaks wudu are not restrictions to make life difficult, but pathways to ensure that every rakah we perform is valid, accepted, and filled with barakah. When we choose to leave the prayer to renew our purity, we are choosing Allah over our pride, His pleasure over people's opinions, and eternal reward over temporary comfort. This is the true measure of sincerity, to act for the one who knows the unseen and the seen, even if others do not understand. So let us remember, physical cleanliness is the gateway to spiritual purity, and both are essential for our salah to rise to the heavens as a deed accepted. May Allah grant us the courage to obey Him in every moment, the humility to admit when we must renew our purity, and the wisdom to know that no act of worship is too small to be done correctly for His sake alone. And may every step we take towards Him be in a state of both outward and inward cleanliness, so that when we stand before Him, our bodies and our hearts are ready for His mercy.